The Intel Arc B580 is a GPU that needs no introduction. However, this card, while reviewed very positively at its launch, has been found to have a huge issue. And no, I am not talking about your ability to buy it. Although that has been rather troublesome, hasn't it? As many reviews, updates, news, build videos, and general discussions there have been around this GPU, the general public has not even been able to buy it. But here we are, making yet another video about the B580. This is technically Saya's 5th video covering it. Look at her, she is already fitting into the tech YouTuber space. I am so proud. I am sure we will get a Raid Shadow Legends sponsorship any day now. But the issue I am referring to is not about its availability. It is that the Battle Mage can lose performance at 1080p with any CPU that is not a Ryzen 9800X 3D. What I am referring to is a driver overhead issue. I could explain it in great detail, but Saya wants to do it, so here you go.
Expensive CPU, no problem. Not expensive CPU, problem. 1080p. Did I do good? I did good, right? Tell me I did good.
No. I should have expected as much. Right, well, the issue is as follows. At 1080p, the B580 is losing way more performance than it should with certain CPUs. Much more than its comparative cards such as the RTX 4060. For example, if the B580 outperforms the 4060 with a high-end CPU in 1080p, it stands to reason it should still outperform the 4060 when we swap to a lower-end CPU. However, with lower-end CPUs, the B580's performance now dips below what the 4060 can perform at with that same CPU. That is the basics of this issue. The B580 is losing performance when it should not, which of course is not a good thing at all. The big selling point of this GPU is its price to performance. And while it still retains this, it becomes harder to recommend the card with such performance loss. It should be noted that this does not happen for every game, and is more of an issue with higher CPU-intensive titles. And it does not make games unplayable. In many cases, it can be the difference of only getting 80 FPS instead of 100. And outside of 1080p, it's not so much of an issue, which I will say now is how Intel marketed this card. Use your GPU however you want, but the creators of this card intended for it to be used at 1440p. Of course, that is no excuse for this performance loss, and it would be crazy to think a card made for 1440p can't perform as well in 1080p. So it is a poor excuse. But it's not all bad. The good news is that this is most likely just a driver issue, and it's an issue Intel is both aware of and working on as we speak. So who knows, by the time anyone can even buy this card, this might all be fixed, and all these videos talking about it become irrelevant, much like Saya.
Yeah, well, not even that big of an issue. People are just overreacting.
As we test the B580 at 1080p, I will make some comparisons to how the card ran on 1440p on this system. But for the most part, we will just be simply testing the card and seeing how well it performs, and if its performance is satisfactory. You can judge for yourself if what you see of the B580 makes it worthy of your computer. We will be testing with a Ryzen 5600, 16 GB of 3200 MHz RAM, and with a motherboard that has a Gen 3 PCIe slot. I will have all these details in the description, so you may view them at your own leisure. If you want to know more about the build itself, which Saya has named the Calico, you can check that video out on the channel. Lastly, Saya has finally figured out how to use MSI Afterburner's built-in session benchmark tool, so we will have more accurate FPS tracking and details. How very exciting. Look at that, we are actually improving. Oh, right. It turns out that 1080p really does kill the B580. Now I can see why Intel recommended it as a 1440p card only. Jokes aside, I had to return my B580 mid-benchmarks due to it starting to die on me. My troubles started while playing Spiderman Remastered. In dark areas, I started seeing the GPU artifacting, giving me a light show of random green pixels across my screen. I was a bit worried, but I assumed maybe it was just the video cable or a bug from the game not playing nicely with the card's drivers. I had been testing this GPU for a bit, and this is the first I have seen of this. Although I had noticed some weird visuals with Cyberpunk's graphics menu when I first started testing the GPU, but I assumed that was just part of the menu's experience. I still think this might be the case, I am not sure. Either way, this was the first I had seen of undisputable artifacting with the B580. Determined to keep going, I switched monitors and switched cables and continued to test the GPU. A few hours later, we were on to testing HELLDIVERS 2. Playing on full screen, Saya accidentally tabbed out of the game, and for a brief second it displayed artifacting in parts of the screen. It happened so fast and otherwise seemed fine, so I assumed it was probably fine. I am going to spoil this for you. It was, in fact, not fine. A few benchmarks later, we got to Counter-Strike 2. Testing the card for a bit and running into some non-GPU dying issues, I decided to swap from 1080p to 1440p to see the performance difference. And this is when we got the most dazzling light show and irrefutable proof that something was not right. Warning, there are some flashing lights here. Look away if you are sensitive to lights or sensitive to seeing GPUs die before your very eyes. As you can see, this should not be happening. Even as I finally got the game closed, for 2 to 30-second intervals, the display would die and then show the desktop again before dying again. I just had to manually shut down the PC. When I turned it back on, everything looked normal, but the horrors I had just witnessed were cemented into my mind, an unholy canvas of fuck. I mean, some really sick and twisted shit. The gremlin cat put on the song, Dust in the Wind, and removed the GPU and its drivers from the system. Rest in peace, my blue sparkly boy, rest in peace. Never use the B580 at 1080p, you have been warned. But luckily not all was lost for in the darkest hour, and through the power of friendship and extreme violence, I was able to get another B580. Oh, happy days. We were able to continue the benchmarks and the video was saved. Without further ado, let's get to the benchmarks. As with 1440p, Fortnite at 1080p also auto-set all my graphics to epic settings. Find yourself someone who believes in you as hard as Fortnite believes in the B580. That being said, I again would not recommend you play this game on all epic settings. On epic settings, we got anywhere from 35 to 70 FPS, but mostly around 55. The game was playable but did not feel that smooth, and the potential frame drops could be very interruptive. This is not important at all to the benchmark, but Saya wanted me to tell you that she, and I quote, absolutely gamed on these kids. Her words, not mine. She was doing well until she challenged someone with a sword and got cut down. What a noob. While I would not recommend all epic settings, the game did perform better here than it did at 1440p. However, I was not impressed with Fortnite's 1440p performance to begin with. It should be said that Fortnite has heavy CPU utilization, so perhaps that is why the B580 struggles with it. If that is the case, hopefully driver updates will increase performance across the board with the B580 in Fortnite. Moving on to all high settings, we saw anywhere from 57 to around 80 FPS. For the most part, we sat around 65 or so, to sometimes into the 70s. While this performance certainly was better, I wanted to keep dropping settings to get the most playable and consistent experience. Oh, right. Saya again wanted me to tell you all she got many kills this round. I keep telling her nobody cares, but she just won't listen. Moving on to medium is where we found our sweet spot. Our settings are as follows. All settings set to medium except for view distance, which is kept to epic. Seeing is very pog. We set TSR set to medium with global illumination set to the ambient occlusion slider and reflections set to screen space. With these settings, we saw 93 average FPS, with a minimum of 46 FPS and a maximum of 131 FPS. Saya once again wants to mention how many kills she got in a round. The number was 9. While nobody cares, at one point she did get a double kill by running over people mid-fighting, and that was kind of cool, I guess. It is hard to say how much performance we are losing here at 1080p with our Ryzen 5600 B580 combo. I think it is safe to say we are losing performance, though, and while it is still playable, that might be a deal-breaker for some, and that is reasonable. I think even at 1440p, we are losing performance. So take all of that as you will. Overall, Cyberpunk performed well with the B580 at 1080p. However, something strange did occur, and that was when we turned on super resolution. Usually, with upscaling on, we should see a decent uplift in FPS, but that was just not the case here. I retested several times to just be sure because the results were so similar, but test after test, the results did not change. As you can see here in our very professionally done graphs, for 1080p and no ray tracing, the results for no upscaling and upscaling were so similar. Of course, we can see it had more of an effect with ray tracing enabled, but it is still a very interesting find. For these tests, I used Intel's own supersampling first, but to make sure the issue was not the upscaler itself, I tried out AMD's FSR, but again the results were the same. This is definitely not normal, and most likely tied into the B580's overhead driver issues, but for now, I just do not have enough information on it to say anything else but weird. Comparing our 1080p results to our 1440p results, you can see that at 1440p, our upscaler was more effective. Feel free to pause here for as long as you like and admire this wonderful graph. We ran Grand Theft Auto 5 on all its highest settings, and we got a playable experience. I won't lie though, I was expecting to hit upwards of 180 FPS consistently. In GTA, anything above 180 FPS causes graphical stutters, and that was not the case with the B580 at 1080p. GTA is an old game, and I feel like any modern GPU should be maxing out frames here. At 1440p, we got way more FPS on the same settings. And that just kind of highlights the issue here with the B580, I suppose. At 1080p, we averaged 99 FPS, with a minimum of 55 and a maximum of 152. We are most certainly losing performance here, considering we could get upwards of 180 FPS at 1440p, but it is not like you cannot play this game, so take that as you will. Or don't take it at all. Don't take it and go hide. Hide away from all your problems and all of the B580's problems. Everything is fine. Does that help? Running Hitman on all its max settings and keeping ray tracing off, we hit an average of 145 FPS, a minimum of 45 and a maximum of 205. If there is performance loss here, you will not miss it, as this is a super playable and enjoyable experience. The B580 has no issues with this game at 1080p. Plus 10 house points to Intel? That puts them at 10 whole points. Surely the house cup is theirs. While I cannot comment on if we really are having performance loss here, what I can say is this. You can hit on so many men on this bad boy. Right, there is not much else to say here. Moving on. We ran World of Warcraft on medium settings, which is 5 out of 10 on the graphics slider. As always, World of Warcraft is an unoptimized mess, and performance will be mixed across the board from in cities to raids, to out in the open, and when zooming into rocks. I am just going to start with that last one, zooming into a rock. At 1080p, the B580 takes 0 performance hits while zooming into rocks. The FPS is magnificent, and you should all be impressed. Please go ahead and comment on how impressed you are with the B580's ability to zoom into a rock. Outside of staring at rocks, WoW can be heavily reliant on the CPU, so we are no doubt getting some performance loss here. In the main expansion city, which is always a mess of FPS performance, the B580 at 1080p gave us 50 to 60 FPS in the busiest part of the city. Of course, in other parts of the city you can see upwards of 100 frames, but we will only count it where it is at its lowest. Outside of the city you will see upwards of 200 FPS, and that's expected. Nobody is around you, and you are so alone, so very, very alone. In raids, it will always depend on the fight and raid size, but in a full-size raid, we saw anywhere from 55 to 80 FPS. In some fights, it sat closer to 60. In others, it sat closer to 70. And running around in raids, but not fighting bosses, you can see upwards of 100-plus frames. I would have used our fancy session benchmarking tool here, but wow, FPS varies so greatly, I am not sure how helpful that would be. So FPS generalizations will have to do, and you can make of that what you will. For what it is worth, I do think this is a playable experience. It is also hard to tell if we are losing any actual performance because, again, WoW is very unoptimized and performance varies so greatly. We ran Spiderman Remastered on all its highest settings and without ray tracing. Swinging around the city, which in our last test I found to be the most demanding aspect of our tests, we averaged 88 FPS, with a minimum of 53 and a maximum of 167. I definitely think we had some performance loss here, but it was still playable. You will also most certainly get higher FPS in missions and inside buildings. That being said, I am sure if any upgraded from an older GPU, they would expect a better performance, and that is very fair. For me personally, my biggest issue was that my B580 started artifacting. As much as I do enjoy a good light show, not so much when my GPU is the one to host it. We will ignore this issue and move on. La la la, nothing to see here. We had to run Indiana Jones on all of its lowest settings. We definitely took a huge performance hit here because I was able to run this game on high settings at 1440p. At 1080p, we averaged 57 FPS with a minimum of 25 and a maximum of 112. What really lowered our score was the start of the game, which I think was the developers flexing how graphically wonderful their game is. Indiana Jones has ray tracing always enabled, meaning you cannot turn it off. The start of the game was rough and certainly did not feel smooth. But as we progressed, the FPS was playable in my opinion. Even on low, the game looked good graphically, but the FPS made it rough at parts, to be sure. I do not know if I would play this game at 1080p with my B580. Once again, we can only hope that future driver updates fixes this.
3 days later.
And here we are. It is January 17th, and the B580 received a driver update, with this game being one of the fixes. After our driver update, we averaged 77 FPS, but the start of the game was still painful to get through. Good job, Intel. That's the kind of updates we like to see. We ran Hogwarts Legacy on all ultra settings with all ray tracing on, and we averaged 82.5 FPS running around the school. I have not tested the B580 with this game before, so I have nothing to reference. In fact, I was not planning to even benchmark this game at 1080p, but a comment asked for it, so here we are. To be honest, I was expecting worse performance here with the settings I had enabled, but even as an entry-level card, the B580 handles ray tracing admirably. However, there were some frame dips to be sure. Around the castle, we hit a minimum of 14 FPS and a maximum of 152. Saya got so very lost running around the castle, so we definitely got a thorough test here. Outside of the school and running around Hogsmeade, we averaged 69 FPS. Nice. Our minimum frame rate was 41, and our maximum was 100 FPS. I do not know if we are losing performance here, but all I can say is the B580's performance impressed me. A very magical performance indeed. Intel might just come in third place for this year's House Cup. For Red Dead Redemption 2, we put the quality preset level to max for Ultra settings. Running on Ultra and without using FSR, we averaged 99 FPS in the built-in benchmark, with a high of 135 and a low of 30. Turning on FSR, we somehow managed to get a slightly worse average FPS. In this bench and with FSR set to quality, we averaged 98 FPS, with a high of 141 and a low of 32. Turning off FSR and playing the game outside of the benchmark, we averaged 93 FPS, with a low frame rate of 56 and a high of 217. Saya got so lost, she even managed to get stuck in a small stream for a bit, and that was pretty hilarious to see. She then tried to feed the local dogs, which she claimed was very kind of her. The wolves, however, did not seem to appreciate it. But finally she found a town, so we were able to get well-rounded benchmarks after all. And did Saya just peacefully explore the town and admire the old Western charm? No, of course not. She chose violence. How predictable. Either way, the B580 at 1080p can play on ultra settings here. I am not sure if we are losing performance, though, but I still think this is a playable experience. For these next benchmarks, I ran into a slight issue, and that was that my BIOS reset. While normally this would not be a huge deal for other GPUs, for the B580 it's a big issue. A reset BIOS means that Resizable bar will be off. This GPU loses huge amounts of performance with Rebar off, and should not be used without it. Although annoying, this gives us a good opportunity to test, and to see how the B580 performs with Rebar off and on at 1080p. So for these next 4 benchmarks, we will see how the B580 handles these games on 1080p and how much performance the card loses with resizable bar off versus it being turned back on. We are offering so much information in this video, so much value. If only you could buy the GPU for it to matter. Oh well. So for the tests of Battlefield 1, Marvel Rivals, Helldivers 2 and Counter-Strike, you will get extra benchmarks. Hooray for you! Pat yourself on the back for being an excellent viewer of this channel. Good for you. Was that positive enough? Do you feel valued? Hit the like button if you feel valued. If you do not, also hit the like button. Do not worry, we can tell the difference. I had several issues running Counter-Strike on this system with Rebar off. For one, no matter what FPS I had or what graphical settings I was running on, there were huge stuttering issues. Oh, I guess that was it. That was the only issue I had, huh? Right, well, this game ran awful. I was not alone, though, since looking up solutions online, there was a considerable amount of guides and information on how to stop the stuttering. I mean, there are even things you can type into the game's Steam launcher to change how the game launches and to stop certain issues. That was how I even got MSI Afterburner to work with this game, typing a phrase into the game's launcher. I'm not sure if I can fully blame our B580 here for these stutters. That was until I turned Rebar on, and all the stutters went away and we got a decent boost to our FPS. Do not play Counter-Strike without resizable bar. Not only do you lose FPS, the game becomes an unplayable stuttering mess. With Rebar off, we got around 124 average FPS on low settings, and it was not playable. With Rebar on, we got 191 FPS on low settings. And while this is certainly an improvement and our stuttering was gone, it should be noted that our $50 RX 580 averaged 248 FPS. You did not hear that wrong. Not only did the RX Chad 580 not need some bar that changes size, it also got way more FPS. That is such an extreme difference in performance. I mean, come on. Playable or not, that is kind of embarrassing. It is safe to say that we are losing performance here at 1080p. Otherwise, the only takeaway here is the B580 cannot play Counter-Strike at all without resizable bar on. Also, watching Sire struggle to not instantly get killed versus people who have been playing this game for the last 20 years was ugly. So very, very ugly. I enjoyed it greatly. Running Helldivers 2 on its low preset with Rebar off, we averaged 73 FPS, with a minimum of 63 and a max frame rate of 127. With Rebar on, we averaged 101 FPS, with a minimum of 88 and a high of 116. So there is definitely a good bit of performance loss here without Rebar on. Putting the preset to high with Rebar on, we got an average of 60 FPS. Regardless of the GPU's performance in Helldivers with or without Rebar, we definitely had performance loss here at 1080p versus the GPU's performance at 1440p. On 1440p, we were able to get 60 to 70 FPS while playing on ultra texture quality and a mix of high and medium setting sliders. Still, I was surprised how well the B580 ran Helldivers without Rebar on, but I would still not suggest it, since it brings with it a large performance loss on top of the B580's performance loss at 1080p with its overhead driver issues. Either way, it seems democracy will spread at whatever resolution. Use that information however you will or don't, I don't care. For some reason, the first launch of this game did not let MSI Afterburner run, so we had to rely on the small FPS counter built into the game. After a relaunch, the game allowed Afterburner to display properly, and the menus were a lot smoother as well. Well, relatively speaking, since apparently even menu performance struggles in this game without Rebar on. So that is interesting to note, I guess. At first I tried Marvel Rivals on high settings, with Intel's super resolution upscaling. On high settings and with Rebar off, we saw anywhere from 20 to 40 FPS, and I would not recommend it. This was also Sire's first time playing Marvel Rivals, and she had no idea what she was doing. Running low settings with Intel's upscaling, we saw an average of 64 FPS, with a minimum of 24 and a maximum frame rate of 162. This was certainly a more playable experience, but most competitive players would not be satisfied here, and I do not blame them. Running the game with Intel's own frame gen and keeping the settings on low, we saw an average of 109 FPS with a minimum of 31 and a max of 174. Turning on Rebar, we averaged 60 FPS on ultra settings with superscaling on, 105 FPS average with low settings superscaling on, and 154 with both superscaling and Intel's own frame gen on. I will say here, Intel's superscaling has really impressed me across these various games. In my opinion, it looks solid with the Battle Mage. While AMD and NVIDIA GPUs can access and use Intel's upscaler, it will not function as well. But running it alongside the B580, I am a fan. I have not run this game on 1440p to compare our performance here, but I think it is safe to say we are losing out. This game may certainly see some performance uplift as the Battle Mage's drivers mature. We ran Battlefield 1 on all its highest and ultra settings. With Rebar off, we saw an average of 96 FPS, with a minimum of 32 and a maximum frame rate of 163 FPS. With Rebar on, we averaged 125 FPS, a minimum of 57, and a maximum frame rate of 201. Regardless of the performance uplift with Rebar on, we definitely saw better performance at 1440p with this game. At 1440p, and with the same settings, we could see anywhere from 140 to 200 frames. That being said, this game surprised me with Rebar off. Once again, I would not recommend it, but you can certainly play this game with it off and get decent frames. And the immense nature of Battlefield gameplay is always a sight to be seen. You really do feel like you are on a battlefield. But this is not a game review, this is a graphics card review. A graphics card review with many issues and flaws, mainly sire. With or without Rebar, and at 1080p or 1440p, you can still comfortably play Battlefield 1. Before I get into it, I just want to say I still like this GPU, and I think it has amazing potential, and it is a powerful card that can bring some real enjoyment to its users. Regardless of my issues with the B580 itself dying, we most certainly did lose performance here at 1080p. When I tested this card on 1440p, it was hard to really tell if we were losing performance on its own, but seeing how the B580 performed in these games at 1080p versus 1440p, it paints a more clear picture. There can be no mistake that there is a real issue here. And why I do agree that this is a 1440p card, and that's how Intel themselves marketed the Battle Mage, it also stands to reason that a 1440p card should dominate at 1080p. Issues with Rebar on or off aside with Counter-Strike, the RX 580 was able to easily handle that game while the B580 struggled with it. I bought that RX 580 for $50 and most likely saved it from its retirement as a crypto mining card. The B580 has no real excuse here. Again, I know this is a 1440p card, but this is an entry-level $250 MSRP GPU. The whole point of it is for gamers on a budget who want to replace their old RX or GTX cards. That is the B580's main market, except for Sire, who just likes to collect shiny things. But it is wild and inexcusable that the B580 can perform worse than these old cards in any game at 1080p. Although the first gen of ARC cards was known to struggle with older titles, so we might also just be seeing that here. I will have to test more on this to be sure, but that is for another video. It should be stated that at 1440p, I have no real complaints with this card, and I bought it for this resolution to begin with. But I do not think there is any real defense to be had for clinging to the fact that Intel marketed it as a 1440p card while it struggles to beat 5 to 8-year-old GPUs at 1080p. Of course, and with that all being said, this is a brand new card, and I don't just mean that the B580 just released. Intel GPUs on the whole are still very new. In many ways, ARC GPU owners are beta testers, paving the way for a better future for humankind in making sure we have more than 2 GPU manufacturers. Salute these brave souls and give them some slack for when they have to defend their purchase, because they are on the front lines. And give the B580 some slack. It is an amazing card with some of Intel's brand new tech. I think it not only deserves a chance, but has earned it. Before it broke, I had no plans to return my B580. But since it did break and I did have to return it, I was not sure if I wanted to buy another one. Besides being in the middle of benchmarks and making a video, I was hesitant knowing the issues the B580 had and experiencing it firsthand. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to buy into that again. And I did have enough done to make a 1080p video either way. And after the card was returned, it opened up the possibilities for a new purchase and to test another GPU. Saya is not rich. She just puts most if not all of her spare money into PC parts and builds. But that does not mean that she has money to waste if a product is not worth it. And I would be lying if I said that a small part of me wasn't worried it would happen again with a new B580. I thought about it a good couple of days, but ultimately, when the opportunity came up to get another one, I took it. The bottom line is, I like this GPU, and it lets me support Intel and their GPU manufacturing future. And let's be real, it's named Battlemage. That is one of the coolest names for a GPU. How can I not want it? Quirks aside, I still think this card is worth the money. If you get it around MSRP, that is. I'm also a fan of Intel's super sampling and their new frame gen. It is honestly refreshing to finally have an alternative between DLSS and FSR. And besides, I still have videos I want to make with the B580 and things I want to test it with. I may not always be the most thorough in how I test, but I do believe there is value in my methods and how I approach things. I want to be able to explore the B580 and all of its possibilities, and we have only just begun. Unless it breaks again, then fuck that. Fuck Intel. Stop scamming me. Fuck. Thanks for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe for future videos, and to support the channel. When I first got my B580, my first 3 hours with the GPU was trying to get the Intel graphics software to download. This is the software from Intel itself that allows you to control your GPU and graphics. The only way to download it is to get it through your drivers, as it is all bundled together. But for whatever reason, it would not install for me. I tried with 2 different computers and uninstalled and reinstalled the drivers somewhere around 8 times to see if I could trigger it. I even unpacked the bundle to look within the file itself, all without success. There is a terrible version of it that exists on the Microsoft Store, but it does not actually do anything and is useless. When I reinstalled my second B580 and reinstalled the drivers, this time Intel graphics software magically installed. Finally, I could control my B580 through its actual software, see temperatures and performance metrics, and it even shows if Rebar is on. I am not going to lie, I am afraid to uninstall the GPU and drivers to test other GPUs in this system. What if it doesn't come back when I reinstall the B580? I worked so hard for this. It is a legitimate fear I have.
Hi. For those who do not know me, I am Saya, and this is my YouTube channel. These tech videos I really haven't been talking that much that is because talking too much is hard for me. It both kind of strains my throat and my voice, and to be honest, I do not think I speak very clearly, and well, I don't think many people would watch if it was just me talking. I don't think I'd really get as good of a reception, and to be honest, I get made fun of a lot for how the way I talk and sound. And honestly, I think the robot just does a better job. But thank you so much for all the watching and support. It really means a lot. I don't know what else to say. Bye bye.